Today on Dylan Talks Tone, we're going to talk about how big your amp should be and how it affects your tone. So this is the next in our series of videos about our signal chain, right? Starting with our guitar, going through our pedal board, and coming to our amp. How it all works together and what our signal is doing as it makes that journey. Do me a favor if you would and subscribe to this video, to this channel, and we're gonna have a bunch more about that stuff coming up. You can refer to our other videos that we've already shot in this series right here. I'll put one of those little things you can click on right there. With the help of Creation Music Company and Keeley Effects, and now today in this video, Fuchs Audio Technologies. Andy Fuchs actually called in. We recorded a little interview with him, and he talked to us about how big our amp should be, what the difference is and what it does to your tone going from 5 to 10 to 20 to 50 to 100 watts, you know, and understanding that choice. So let's just jump right into that interview. So we've got Andy Fuchs from Fuchs Audio Technologies. Is that what we're calling it these days? Sure. Okay. Yep. Personally, my favorite amps that I've ever played. I'll just say that. They are my favorite amps I've ever played. And we're going to talk a little bit today about the whole amp selection thing, because if we're going to put pedal boards in front of amps and we're going to have these huge long signal chains with overdrives and boosts and all this kind of stuff, we need to understand where the signal is going and what we're doing with it. And so I would like to talk to you, Andy. Let me ask you, in this whole discussion of like, what amp should I get? How many watts do I need? How big is this? If we go from, let's say, 5 to 10 to 20 to 50 to 100, talk to us briefly about what that means in tonal changes and in like headroom, what that gives us as we go from, say, 5 to 100.
Well, part of that is going to be player and gig specific. Obviously, if you're playing small gigs in a bar or a small club, or you're in a band where they mic up your amp and you don't have to depend on your amp to reach the people, you could certainly get by with 10, 15, 20 watts of Blues Junior or Blackjack 21 like we make. Something along those lines for many players is going to be adequate. Again, as the player becomes more sophisticated, as the gigs get a little bit bigger, if your needs as a player, escalate to needing more clean headroom, more overall clean volume, obviously getting more wattage helps. The formula basically is you basically have to double wattage to get your level to really feel an appreciable difference. The difference between a 20 and a 25 watt amp or a 15 and a 20 is certainly not as significant as going from a 20 to a 50 or a 50 to a 100. A lot of players, I'll give you a good example. I make a jazz amp. It's a hybrid. It's a 150 watt solid state power amp with a tube front end. Very good for modelers, very good for pedal guys, really good for a guy who plays clean jazz. If you listen to a guy named Dave Stryker, he's one of the more dynamic and powerful organ trio type players. He uses that amp and he gets tons of clean headroom. Even if he's doing chord melody and there's a lot of bass notes which will suck up wattage, that amp stays clean up to almost painful levels. It's amazing what that will do to your headroom. The funny thing is, when I first introduced it, Vic Juris was the first person to buy one, very well-respected jazz player. He said, I only need 50 watts. And I laughed and I said, that's like buying a car and saying I only need 50 horsepower because I'm just going to the supermarket. You could have more horsepower or more wattage and not necessarily use it, and I use that in quotations, but you may appreciate it. I gigged last night. I brought a 100 watt 112 combo out, and the guy next to me was playing a 20 watt Tweed Fender concert, an old school Fender concert. He was playing Dirty Slide, had it cranked up, it sounded fantastic. My 100 watt amp never overtook him. I used the overdrive channel, and I controlled my volume, so my 100 watt amp wasn't overriding a 20 watt amp that was 3 feet next to it. So you have to also control it. So you as a player, depending on the kind of gig you play, and your expectations in a gig environment of what you need are going to determine the best amp you should buy.
So when we go from, let's say, a 10 watt amp to a 20 watt amp, how much louder are we actually getting?
I don't think you're getting significantly louder. I think what you're getting is more clarity and less distortion for the same approximate sound level. The 20 watt amp is going to sound cleaner, and it may sound a little louder, obviously, because it's a couple of more watts, but it will break up less for that same sonic level. You know,
Okay.
I think minimally, like our Blackjack's 21 watts, there's a lot of guys out gigging those things in bars. I got a local guy playing harmonica through it, loves it to death. He's playing in a big room, they stick a mic in front of him. Some of the guitar player guys throw them up on chairs, or they put an unused sound box underneath the front and they tip them back a little bit, and they got plenty of volume. I mean, 20 well-designed watts is a pretty respectable amount of power. You can move more air with more power, but you certainly can start using it in a semi-professional environment, I would say from 20 watts on up.
And that's completely a different conversation, but speaker efficiency also has the choice that it goes with. It has a lot to do with that as well.
Well, it does make a difference, but like if you look at audio speakers, like for stereo, for example, you know, they rate different speakers at different dB levels.
Right.
And it's the same is true of guitar speakers, although most guitar speakers tend to be, you know, 90 dB or better, 92, some of them even approaching 100. If you're going to run low power and you're looking for more wattage, either you find a more efficient speaker, it's got a higher dB rating, or you basically just add another speaker, and that effectively gives you a couple of dB more of volume, as long as you take care of obviously matching the impedance and get the maximum out of your amp. Two speakers just sounds twice as good as one is the best way to put it. You can get away with 20 watts in a 212, and guys are like, wow, that's only 20 watts? That's pretty cool.
No, that's right, because you're moving more air. Yeah, it's just you're just moving more air.
Yep.
Okay, so the majority of guys that are watching this show and listening to it on our radio show are gonna probably have no less than a compressor, 2 or 3 overdrives, and a boost. You know, a lot of guys have a real long signal chain, a lot of pedals in front of their amp. So what would you say, how would most guys are going to have this big pedal board. How does that affect amplifier choice when we're talking about 10 to 50 to 100 watts?
Well, again, it depends on how you use it. You know, in the case of like, if you're not expecting or you don't want amp distortion or you don't plan to use amp distortion, obviously the more wattage the better, because you can get your compression and your overdrive from your pedal board. In which case you basically want the amp to sort of be a clean window, you know, a delivery system, if you will, for the sound that you've generated on your pedal board. You know, I use a combination of the two when I gig. I use usually an overdrive Supreme, one variant or another, sometimes even a casino combo, which is just a stripped down version of the ODS. The distortion channel in those amps can sometimes be a little too friendly for certain kinds of music. You know, my band calls out, you know, Cheap Trick or ZZ Top or a little bit of a harder rock tune. I'll use one of my cream pedals, which tends to get me more in a rock sort of Marshall tube screamer kind of a voicing. Sometimes for like uber gain, I'll even stack that overdrive pedal with the overdrive channel in the amp and put them together. So, you know, if you're just going to depend on the pedal board, I would rather say to somebody, try and find yourself a simpler amp that maybe you won't even need or have an overdrive channel, because you're going to be getting that all from your pedal board, and put the money into wattage.
Oh, okay. That makes a lot of sense. So that makes a lot of sense. Because that's what a lot of these guys are, a lot of people are doing. I go the opposite direction. I like a Blackjack, no pedals, and just my volume knob on my finger right here, and maybe kick the overdrive channel on the amp once in a while. Like that's, you know, even now playing a Kemper, even now, I still really only use one amp and just use my volume knob. You know, I don't use all kinds of effects. So it's just a matter of the approach that you're going to take. So how much does using the dynamic range of the amp, the power of the amp, so let's say we take a 20 watt amp and we drive it, how much does that differ from, and I know this is going to depend on the pedal, but one of the discussions we're having on our show is when you start to drive a signal, obviously we're clipping it. For lack of a better word, we're clipping it. Some of those frequencies just are squished. They're just not there anymore. Mm-hmm. So what difference are you going to see from, let's say, taking one of your amps, like a Blackjack, and pushing it to 1 or 2 o'clock on the volume, the master volume, versus running it clean and putting a pedal in front of it? How much dynamic difference is that?
Well, the difference is going to be, again, player dependent. Some guys, if you're going to work your guitar volume up and down, you can use the amp's natural compression to your advantage. If you're compressing things earlier on your pedal board, you could basically let the amp breathe a little bit more and get your compression earlier in the chain. I mean, one of the interesting things that I find with extra wattage, or more wattage than you might think you need, I use a Mini 112 ODS Classic combo. It's 100 watts with a warehouse 1890 speaker in it. I can play a chord and just stop, mute the chord, hit it and stop. And what's cool is, no matter where I am, I can still hear my reverb just kind of die off out in the field, almost like a studio kind of an effect, because the amp's not holding it back. That's also true of the Jazz Classic. I mean, that's 100 watts. You strum that reverb, and you can actually hear it decay, and the amp's not holding it back in any way, and that's real nice.
So we're not talking just about drive compression, but we're also talking about some of the other effects that are surrounding it. Yep.
Oh, sure. I mean, overdriving an amp or overdriving a pedal is certainly going to be different than driving the power amp of an amp into, into clipping and sag, and your filter capacitors are starting to load down, and your power tubes are starting to provide that clipping. The power tubes clip. I mean, it's just another tool in your toolbox, so to speak. You use it to suit the kind of tune or the kind of gig you're playing.
So having more watts is not, so that'll actually let everything that you put in front of it breathe a little more. Is basically what you're saying. No, this is great. This really helps out, because I think a lot of people don't understand how to choose an amp. That's and what we find when people call us, and I don't know about you, but when they basically want to play what somebody else is already playing. Whatever big star, insert that name here, that's the amp they want to play. But understanding how you personally going to use the amp to make the choice sometimes is a little bit more useful. So that's what we're trying to help people to do. So I appreciate you taking a few minutes today and talking to us about this, and just giving people to think about as they start to make these choices. So I appreciate your time.
I really appreciate Andy calling in and giving us some of his time. Understanding the dynamics, and as you go through from 5 to 100 watts, what it really gives you should be able to help you make that choice. If you're thinking about getting a new amp, or you're thinking about changing how you structure, are you going to go from all of your drive coming from your pedals, or are you going to use the drive from the amp? What are you going to do even in a loop or otherwise? We'll get into all of that stuff in the future as well. My name is Dylan. This has been Dylan Talks Tone. And if you have any questions or anything you want us to cover in this series, definitely let me know. We'll talk to you soon.